This video will walk through the RStudio portion of the confidence interval exercise we were working on in class on October 4th. It's important to note that in executing the instructions for getting a script file loaded up, just because of the lack of flexibility that is imposed by having a fixed syntax file to distribute to everybody, the file and the script file and the data set and the methodology will only work if it's done exactly the way it's described. Obviously, when you're working on your own files, you have the flexibility of structuring things the way you want, but when we distribute fixed syntax, the file name of the data set, where it's located, all that has to be exactly correct in order for it to work out of the box. If you don't do it exactly the way we specify, it can still work, but you're going to have to do some manual fixes to your files to make sure that they work correctly. And we're going to run into a couple problems when we do this, as you'll see, and I'll show you the kind of things. So I'm working in Windows 7, so I'm going to start from the email announcement, and I need the CSV file, and I also need the script file. So let's click to open a browser. I'm going to log into the site very quickly so that it can download the folder, the CSV file. So it's downloading the CSV file. I'm going to go back to my email and also click on the script file. And now both are downloaded. Now these are actually, if I click on this arrow in Chrome and do show in folder, those are actually in my downloads folder in Windows 7. That's a default location. Notice that neither one of these now has the correct name because I've already downloaded these files before, and so Windows is renaming them. So I'm actually just going to get rid of a couple of these. I'm going to delete those. And so the two files that I actually want are right here. And so I'm going to go ahead and open RStudio now. And I'm going to, I've got a bunch of stuff going on here. I'm going to go ahead and start a new project up here, like I talked about. And so if your files are in a directory, you can use the existing, you just can point your project to the directory where your files are. I do not want to point my directory, my project to the downloads folder, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory. I'm going to call it Acupuncture CIs, like we discussed in class. The base directory of this is where my portable R installation is and where I want this to be a subdirectory of the CRP241 folder. So I'm going to go ahead and create that project. Now RStudio has moved me into that folder, Acupuncture CIs. And so now what I'm going to do is go back to Windows Explorer, to my downloads folder. I'm going to grab these two files, copy, and I've got a shortcut to my my folder location where I keep my RStudio portable install. I'm going into the CRP241 folder, and this is I've got an old version, but this is the folder I just created. So I'm going to go in there. There's my project file. I'm going to right click and paste. So now I'm in Windows. I've copied and pasted my two key files over here. I can go ahead and close this. Now notice they've showed up here, right? So according to the instructions, I can do a couple of things now. I'm actually going to close my Outlook so it doesn't bother us while we're working on this. So I've got both my files in here. Notice the little R on the script file. RStudio recognizes this as an R script file. So I can simply click on this, and now it's going to load up this file into the proper pane so I can work on it. And I can expand that, clicking on this button up here, so I can really see this. Remember that green, you don't need 2 pound signs. I just do that out of habit. But if you put a pound sign, the text will turn green. R will ignore that when it's submitted to execute, and so these are notes to us. So the key command here is this data read.csv. Now notice there's no file path, there's no folder path in front of this. That's because I've created a project, and RStudio is going to automatically start looking in my project folder for this file, which indeed is in my project folder. But notice the exact file name has to be, they have to match. What the file name is and what we're calling here has to match. We don't need the path, but we do need the right file name. So this is the same thing as clicking down here in our workspace. If we did import dataset and from text file, it would have the exact same result as running this line of code here, data, to create this data object. So I'm going to go ahead and run this code. I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to go up here and run. Notice that I get in my console an execution, and now I have a data object with 401 observations of 94 variables. If I click on this, it will open a tab, and I can now see my data. Right? And the key variables we want are PK1, PK2, and PK5. Note that if for some reason when we click on the script file it doesn't work, we can always go up to the File menu, do Open File, and again RStudio will default to the directory, and then we would just pick the Acupuncture folder. We would pick the script file, and that would open the script file, and then we could run this code. Alright, so now let's look at these two lines of code. These are going to subset the data set because we're going to be interested in calculating confidence intervals for each of the groups, the control group and the acupuncture or treatment group, and we're also going to be interested in comparing them. So we're using our subset command, and we're subsetting on the group variable, which is the variable that separates the cohort into these two groups, where 0 corresponds to control, 1 corresponds to treatment or acupuncture. So I've highlighted those two lines of code, simply going to run those. Notice I now have two new data objects. I have a control object and a treatment object. If I click on the control, notice I have all of the variables in this data frame. It's just that I only have subjects from the control arm. Now the next thing that we have to do is, in order to have the same data set as what was analyzed in the manuscript, we need to restrict our two data sets, the control and treatment, to subjects who had a 12-month headache severity or PK5 measurement. So again, we're going to use the subsetting command, and we're going to use the is.na function. And what we're asking it to do is to subset the control and treatment to those control and treatment patients for which is.na equals false. Now if we look at the note up here, is.na will return a false value if there is an observed value for that data point. So this is.na function is telling RStudio that we only want patients who have an observation for the 12-month headache severity. So let's go ahead and run this. And we have new data objects where we have no miss PK5, and I've used that name just because it's informative of what that is. Notice that control has dropped from 196 to 140 observations, and treatment has dropped from 205 to 161. So it looks like it's done what we wanted. And so the next thing was wasn't totally necessary. The next section of code in black simply renames the variables so they're easier to type. We could have just done that in one step, but I wanted to remind you that you can do variable recoding and renaming fairly simply. So now we've got control complete case, or CC. Notice that it's the same as the no miss PK5, which we want, and we've got treat complete case, which is the same as the no miss PK5. Alright, so we've brought the data set in, we've done some data manipulations to get the right set of observations in each data set. So now the actual analysis, and this is typically the case, it's much harder to get the data in the right form for the analysis than to do the analysis itself. So we have three commands here that we need to run. The first is the 95% confidence interval for the acupuncture group, then control, then for the difference between them. I'm going to go ahead and run just the first one, and what we've done is a one sample t-test. We only have one mean here. It's the mean of the treatment or acupuncture group, and as we discussed in class, The information, the first couple of lines of information is related to a t-test, which is a testing situation. We're going to talk about that in Module 6 actually, so I'm going to ignore that for now. The key part is we get a 95% confidence interval from 14.11 to 18.38, and we get our sample mean estimate of 16.25. So if we go ahead and highlight and run the control, confidence interval from 19.50 to 25.19 with a mean of 22.34. Lastly, we can get the confidence interval for the difference between the means. And again, what we're seeing here is the top part is related to a t-test. We'll ignore that. The bottom part, notice that both our lower confidence limit and our upper confidence limit are negative. And that's simply the negative signs are a function of the direction of the subtraction. So we know that because of the ordering in this call to the t-test function, we have the treatment mean of 16.25 and we're subtracting the control mean of 22.34. So the interval contains all negative values. Negative here actually is interpreted as treatment being superior, because the lower the score means the lower the headache severity. So if we have lower scores in treatment than control, then the difference will be negative, and so we see that or actually all the values in the confidence interval are negative, indicating a preference for treatment or lower headache severity in the treatment arm. So that covered all the code for what we did in class, or just about all. We also have histograms, and I can go ahead and run each of those separately. I'll run the first one. We should get a graph for the control group for PK5. I'm going to run it for the treatment group. We did discuss how the distributions were similar in nature. The last set of commands are, again, there's actually a mistake here. This should be t.test. Let's correct that. So if we run the first one, this will give us a confidence interval for the difference between PK1, which is baseline headache severity, and PK5, which is 12-month headache severity, within the treatment group. So it's looking at means, a confidence interval for the mean at baseline, the difference between that and the mean at 12 months, and it's using the same form of t-test function that we used before, and then a second t-test function that specifies paired equal to true. And what we'll see here, if I bring this down a little bit, is that we had a confidence interval in the first function of 5.28 to 11.38, and down here it's 6.35 to 10.3, so we don't get the same interval. We'll talk about this when we get to this problem, but this is how you run the code for that. So that's all I intended to do, was do the RStudio portion. We will continue discussing this exercise in class on Monday, October 8th.